Choir, I am so sorry. You gave me direction that I was supposed to wait for you to be seated, and I did not do that. I'll do better next week. This is a week of working out technology, is it not? I'm so glad this is not my first Sunday here. I would never come back. Not really. You know, it is the case that those of us who live with a chronic condition, no matter how much we might desire release and relief from that condition, it is the case that we often begin to think of it as a part of who we are. We tie our identity to it. It's like we aren't sure who we would be without this constant, irksome companion. And if a person is unable to see, or unable to hear, unable to speak, sometimes that limitation becomes an actual title for the individual. You know, like the blind man, the deaf woman, the mute child, as though we can't know them apart from this limitedness. I can imagine this was probably true of Bartimaeus. He was the blind man. And our text reflects that this morning. Mark calls him Bartimaeus, which simply means the son of Timaeus. He has no name for us other than that. There is no personal name here. He's identified and personalized by his blindness. So we could read this text as Jesus was walking through the streets of Jericho. Timaeus' son, you know, the blind one, he was begging by the side of the road. I wonder how people identify this blind beggar after his encounter with Jesus. I wonder how he identified himself. I spent a couple of summers in Durham, North Carolina, going to school. And while I was there, I saw people begging up and down the street. That's not an uncommon thing to see in cities, right? I've seen it in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., in L.A., in Dallas, in Albuquerque, in Lubbock, in Amarillo. We even have people begging right here in Clovis, New Mexico, right? Have you seen the entrance at Walmart lately? There's always somebody standing there. Somebody standing there. But the beggars that I saw at Durham, I don't know, they were a little different. They really did stand out. As you might expect, they all have the typical cardboard sign, you know, we'll work for food, something to that effect. But they also carried some kind of container to collect their money in. They didn't just stick it in the pocket. They had a bowl or a jar, something to use as a collection vessel. They almost all also had a large bucket that they turned upside down to sit on. And I had not ever seen that before. But the thing that really made them stand out is that they all wore a bright orange vest, a safety vest, like you see on a road crew. That was not something that I had ever seen before, but you couldn't miss them. You couldn't. And so, because they grabbed your attention in that bright orange vest, I began to notice them. And I saw them everywhere I went. Everywhere I drove, they were there. And I finally came to the conclusion, and I don't mean this at all to be disparaging, but I came to the conclusion as I drove past the same corners day after day, seeing the same faces at the same location, that many of these people had taken up begging as an occupation of sorts. They seemed to have, their own place to be and their appointed time to be there and their own tools of the trade. A jar, a bucket, a vase. It was unfamiliar to me. But it wasn't at all unfamiliar to the residents of Durham, North Carolina. And the sight of vocational beggars would not have been at all uncommon in the ancient world. Most every job required some sort of physical labor. So if you were a person with physical limitations, finding any kind of work would have been very difficult. And because this was a time of no social reform, no government aid, there were many people who had to earn a living by begging. They stood on busy roads and they hung out in places where people gathered, like the temples, the ceremonial bathhouses. They were often ignored, and we know that because they existed in such poverty. But they placed themselves in certain situations so that they would be seen. The son of Timaeus took his place sitting by a well-traveled road in great hopes that someone would have compassion on him and acknowledge him and give to him out of the generosity of their heart. So a large crowd of people was leaving Jericho down that same road where Bartimaeus was sitting, and above the commotion and the noise of this crowd, he heard a name that was familiar to him, Jesus of Nazareth. And in one single sentence, he confessed his faith in that name. The son of Timaeus cried out to the Son of David. Last week we talked about God's promise to Israel and to Israel's great King David. God promised that his dynasty would never come to an end. God said, if you remain faithful to me, David, then one of your heirs will sit on your throne and your kingdom will survive for all time. So as we understand that, God's plan was to raise up a man from David's lineage to be God's holy agent. His purpose would be to turn the heart of every man, woman, and child to God. He would be the anointed servant of God, the Messiah. That's what Messiah means, anointed one. Christ is the same thing in Greek. It's not Jesus' last name. It's a title we give him. When Jesus came onto the scene, healing the sick and exorcising demons, opening the ears of people who were unable to hear, healing the lame, giving sight to those who couldn't see. When Jesus came onto the scene, bearing witness to the power of God in him and upon him, people began to think that maybe he was this Messiah, this Christ, the anointed one for whom Israel had been waiting. Bartimaeus believed he was, and he confessed it above the clamor of the crowd. And the more that the crowd tried to shush him and keep him silent, the more loudly he confessed and made his plea. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus called the blind man to himself, and then he asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Oh, it's kind of like Job when God says, I'll ask and you answer. What do you want me to do for you, Bartimaeus? It's a very poignant question. And so Bartimaeus had his chance. And he could have asked for any number of things, church. Any number of things. He could have asked for a little money, right? That's what he was there for. He was begging. He could have asked for money for some support. He could have asked for something to eat, for a meal, for a month's worth of meal. He could have asked for clothing, for a bath. I think of the things I would want if I had nothing. A bath, a place to rest my weary body, something to help the tension of my constant worry and fatigue to leave me. He could have asked for temporary shelter from the heat of the day. Or maybe this was a cool season. Maybe he needed a coat. He could have asked for a coat. He could have said to Jesus, "Will you please have one of your disciples take me home and care for me?" He could have asked for any number of things. And any of these things would have been perfectly logical, certainly appropriate, right? And completely obtainable. But Bartimaeus did not ask for any of these things. He dismissed what was obtainable, and instead he asked for what was impossible. Bartimaeus, the blind man, asked to see. He asked to see. What if, church, just say, what if this was our day to meet Jesus? What if he were passing by the good people of Trinity United Methodist Church, right out here on 21st? Is this 21st? I'm completely directionally challenged. But he passed right down the busy street of 21st, right by us. Right by the place where we sit in our struggle, limited by what we can't see. If he called us to himself, and then standing right there before us, he asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" Trinity, what do you want me to do for you? We answer him. I've considered that question a number of times. As I said, this is one of my favorite stories of healing. I go back to it over and over again, and I've considered that question a number of times from a number of different angles, and I think the best way for us to answer would be just like Bartimaeus. I think we too should ask for the impossible. Rabbi, we want to see. We want to see. We want to see beyond our own limitations. Help us look past these things that tell us, this is who you are. Open our eyes to unfettered possibilities. Jesus, help us to look at every situation through the lens of God's promise. Rabbi, we want to see. We want to see. When Bartimaeus made his request to Jesus, Jesus said to him, "Your faith has healed you." And then he received his sight. You've heard that saying, seeing is believing, right? Seeing is believing. But in Bartimaeus' case, believing is seeing. Now, can that be said of us? You know, it is the case. It is the case when we live with a chronic condition. No matter how much we might desire release and relief from that condition, it is the case that we begin to think of it as a part of who we are. We tie our identity to it. Without this irksome, constant companion, who would we be? These limitations even become part of our title. Small church. Aging congregation. It's as though we can't know ourselves apart from our own limitedness. In Christ, we find the power of vision. You know the difference between vision and goal? I've talked to some of you about this already. You know the difference between a vision and a goal, church? A goal is something you can obtain. It takes hard work, takes some dedication. But if you set a goal for yourself, if you're dedicated to it, you can obtain it. We can obtain any kind of goal we want. We wanted a great VBS. We had a great VBS. A goal is something obtainable. A vision is something impossible. Jesus meets us in the impossible, the very place where eyes cannot see, and he urges us to just apply our faith. I would say he dares us to. He dares us to ask for what is beyond us, for what is unobtainable in our own might, for what can only be accomplished by the power of God. See, when we stand before Jesus asking to have our eyes open, he gives us godly vision. And he enables us to see through the lens of faith. So guess what? Church? What? Today's our day. Jesus approaches us where we are, waiting and wanting, pleading to see. He stops to address us. He asks us, what do you want me to do for you? So how will we answer him? Perhaps our request will be like that of the faith-filled son of Timaeus. Rabbi, we want to see. I wonder how people will identify us after this encounter with Christ. I wonder how we will identify ourselves. By the power of the God who does the impossible. Amen and amen.